I'm really going to hope that this is working. So, colleagues, I promised a little something for Marx and Mill. So already done Marx, let's do Mill now. So this is going to be a text by Jeremy Waldron, who is an important interpreter of Mill in the English-speaking world. So anyway, so this is from Cahn, our reader. It's a short introduction, 3 pages. I hope we'll be able to do this quickly. Anyway, John Stuart Mill was born in London, educated privately by his father, James Mill, a utilitarian, a friend and follower of Jeremy Bentham, and a considerable political thinker in his own right. The story of Mill's peculiar education is notorious, largely through his own account of it in the autobiography published shortly after his death. Under Bentham's guidance, and as Mill grew older, in the company of such distinguished thinkers as the economist David Ricardo and the jurist John Austin, James Mill Sr. set out to cultivate in his son the perfect utilitarian mind and intellect equipped with the material and analytical skills that would enable it to focus without distraction on the Benthamite political agenda. Without distraction turned out to mean without the benefit of any religion, art, poetry, or philosophy, besides the basic empiricism that Bentham's system required or presupposed. Or more generally, without any sense of the proper place the emotions should occupy in a healthy view of the world. So again, so this very unemotional, very strict education of Mill. So should you write about this on University of London exam? Well, yeah, maybe a sentence. Clearly, Mill is militating against in his later philosophy. Anyway, these deficiencies surfaced in a mental crisis that beset the young man, John Stuart Mill, in 1826-27, and Mill's realization that they were deficiencies meant that his own outlook and because of the eventual importance of his work, utilitarian philosophy, were never the same again, right? So basically, this is going to be, I think, the divide between higher and lower pleasures, but we'll get there, hopefully. Anyway, the young man who had worked so assiduously for social improvement, who, among other things, had been arrested in 1823 for distributing leaflets about birth control in London, became convinced that a Benthamite calculus of cost and benefit, pain and pleasure were too crude to be deployed as a tool of social change. In its place, Mill sought to reconstruct utilitarianism so that it incorporated elements of romantic thought and embodied a sense that while happiness in general was good, certain experiences and enjoyments were qualitatively, not just quantitatively, better than others. So this, again, basically higher and lower pleasures. The distinction between higher and lower pleasures, yes, here it is exactly, elaborated in Mill's book, Utilitarianism. Better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied can easily be made to sound elitist or indulgently aestheticist, right? So this charge of elitism, paternalism, perfectionism, right? Let me add these words: paternalism, perfectionism. Right? Does Mill owe more to Aristotle with his idea of eudaimonia rather than to Bentham, right? Is Mill a utilitarian anymore, right? With the introduction of this distinction between higher and lower pleasures. Anyway, 3 points are worth bearing in mind in assessing the influence in Mill's political theory, its influence in Mill's political theory. First, the higher pleasures were not understood as languid or effective enjoyments. What counted most for Mill was the cultivation and employment of our active faculties. Again, you can see this Aristotelian ideal, right? Human beings become properly human and properly happy when we excellently deploy our active faculties, our curiosity, our questioning, and our ability to make something of our lives and of the world we experience. Second, Mill was convinced, rightly or wrongly, that true happiness, even on its elevated definition, was not just the birthright of the few. Mill was an optimist. He believed that the life of few and transitory pains, many and various pleasures, with a decided predominance of the active over the passive, was already the lot of many, and that present wretched education and wretched social arrangements are the only real hindrance to its being available to all. Social reformism in Mill. Anyway, and so thirdly, though Mill repudiated Bentham's psychology and the theory of value, Mill never abandoned Bentham's commitment to forward-looking social reform in a broadly utilitarian spirit. On the contrary, the works included here represent a sustained effort to alter the wretched social arrangements, such as the subordination of women, the tyranny of mass culture, and the exclusion of the great majority of working people from participation in politics. So this democratic reform, right, which stood in the way of human happiness. And again, I like to see that there's a lot of overlap between what Mill is trying to do and what Marx is trying to do, but be that as it may. Anyway, in each of these instances, a case was made by supporters of the status quo that people were often better off submitting to others' ideas of how to live their lives or letting others look after their interests. In each case, Mill responded, what sort of human beings can be formed under such a regimen? What development can either their thinking or their active faculties attain under tutelage of others, right, basically, right? So in each case, he did his best through his writings to swing the spirit of reform in England away from paternalism and towards the cultivation of freedom and individuality. So notice, Mill himself is accused of being a paternalist, but maybe, some people, so it's like he advocates against paternalism, but some people are saying that maybe he's smuggling his own ideas, his own ideals about human life through the back door. Anyway, so freedom and individuality, of which he thought all men and women were capable. As he said at the beginning of On Liberty, he continued to regard utility as the ultimate appeal on all ethical questions. He remained Benthamite enough not to be interested in the abstract theories of natural right. So Mill is writing against natural right. Like Hobbes and like Rousseau, I would say, Mill is writing against natural rights, right? Against people like such as Locke or Kant. But it must be, he said, utility in the largest sense grounded on the permanent interest of man as a progressive being. This is a super important phrase. So when we talk about utility in Mill, we're talking about utility in the largest sense grounded on the permanent interest of man as a progressive being. Thus, after his mental crisis, Mill did not retreat under the influence of Schiller or Coleridge into the indulgent life of a Victorian romantic, concerned only to protect beauty and feelings from the ravages of routinized utilitarianism. His whole career was one of public service, whether in the pages of London and Westminster Review, which he founded in 1836, along with other young Benthamite radicals, or in the offices of East India Company, where he worked from 1823 to 1855, or in Parliament, where he served one term as the representative for Westminster in the mid-60s, right? His political career in and out of Parliament was notable for his principled stance in favor of the rights of the workers, the rights of political prisoners, and the rights of colonial peoples to a just and decent administration, stance that made him, in Isaiah Berlin's words, the most passionate and best known champion of the insulted and the oppressed of his day. In 1862, Mill published an article entitled The Contest in America, in which he attempted to influence public opinion in Britain against the southern states, and to impress on them the issue that the issue was slavery, not just the right to secession. By no means an easy task, even in the liberal circles in which he moved. In the House of the Commons, Mill spoke against capital punishment, and against the suspension of habeas corpus in Ireland in favor of proportional representation, municipal reform, and women's suffrage. Anyway, in particular, his position on women's rights is a striking exception to the casual indifference of most liberal philosophers to the issue, right? It is explained in part by his association from 1830 with Harriet Taylor, a woman he described in the dedication to On Liberty as the inspirer and in part the author of all that is best in my writings. But though the subjection of women was written and published after Harriet Taylor's death in 1858, there's no reason to doubt the assertion in the opening lines of that tract that the opposition to the legal subordination of one sex to the other was an opinion he had held from the earliest period of his moral and political thinking. Harriet Taylor's influence is discernible in other areas of Mill's writing. There's no doubt that he was more favorably inclined to socialism than he would have been without Harriet Taylor's presence, right? So Mill believed that in an ideal world, capitalist arrangements were better, provided something could be done to mitigate the sources of inherited inequality. Sources of inherited inequality, inherited wealth, taxing inherited wealth. How do you say this? How do you like? Наследство. That's the problem. Unearned privilege. Наследованная собственность. Akin to feudal privileges, right? Anyway, there is no doubt either that Mill's experience of an open and committed friendship with a married woman, for the two were wed only after the death of Harriet Taylor's husband in 1849, laid an important experiential foundation to the loathing of the repressive, moralistic, and, as Isaiah Berlin put it, uniformitarian despotism of contemporary public opinion expressed in On Liberty. So this is another charge which is laid at Mill, and this is discussed in Boucher a little bit, right? This idea that Mill and Harriet Taylor flouted and disregarded the morality of their day, right? So, and in this sense, the idea is that, oh, Mill is maybe only writing on liberty in order to protect his own little experiment in living, right? Now, I don't think that these accusations are fair. I don't think that these charges are fair, but we should keep in mind that they exist. Anyway, the works represented here, Utilitarianism and Liberty and the Subjection of Women, we don't really need to read Subjection of Women for the exam one way or another. We're all, well, it's like you need to know what the basic argument is, but you're not expected to be familiar with it in detail. Anyway, they were all composed during a period of Mill's life in which, as John Gray has pointed out, he thought that his life might be short, following a grave illness, and that he should say what he had to say on the issue he judged central in his time, right? But Mill's earlier writings are important to a system of logic. Principles of political economy quickly became standard texts in their respective subjects, and the essays collected in Mill's dissertations and discussions, including a long review of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, an important work which definitely influenced Mill in a lot of respects. Anyway, add a dimension of sociological and cultural insight that often eludes those who confine themselves to his better-known works. In particular, the affinity with de Tocqueville helps us understand that Mill's primary concern in On Liberty are to do with the social and not just legal repression, so social repression, right? And conformism, if you want, and with the threat to individuality from mass society even more than majoritarian legislation. There is an immense and growing literature on Mill's moral and political theory. Isaiah Berlin's essay, John Stuart Mill and the Ends of Life, in his collection for Essays of Liberty, is an excellent starting point, while Ellen Ryan's Philosophy of John Stuart Mill, Ellen Ryan, some of you are probably familiar with the name, provides an authoritative overview of Mill's arguments. Much of the modern literature focuses on the essay on liberty. Two book-length studies are CL10 and John Gray, Mill and Liberty, a defense, the latter arguing for the consistency of On Liberty and Utilitarianism. Consistency of On Liberty and Utilitarianism. Notice, this is one of the University of London exams, so we may want to look at this book by John Gray. Radcliffe has put together a useful collection of articles. Thompson, the useful study of Mill's democratic theory, fine discussion of Mill's feminism, and Susan Moller Oken. Okay, and that's it. Anyway, that's the end of the chapter. Gonna wrap this up. This was short, but it's okay. In any case, I hope this was stimulating, or at least will help you with the readings. So as always, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you around.